Chapter 4: The Market Forces of Supply and Demand. These are the questions we seek answers to. What factors affect buyers' demand for goods? What factors affect sellers' supply of goods? How do supply and demand determine the price of a good and the quantity sold? How do changes in the factors that affect demand or supply affect the market price and quantity of a good? How do markets allocate resources? Market and competition. A market is a group of buyers and sellers of a particular good or service. Buyers as a group determine demand for the product. Sellers as a group determine supply of the product. Competitive market is where many buyers and sellers each has a negligible impact on market price. Perfectly competitive markets characteristics. All goods are exactly the same. Price takers, so many buyers and sellers that no one can affect the market price. At the market price, buyers can buy all they want and sellers can sell all they want. Demand. Quantity demanded is the amount of a good that buyers are willing and able to purchase. The law of demand. Other things equal, when the price of a good rises, the quantity demanded of the good falls. And when the price falls, the quantity demanded rises. Demand schedule and demand curve. Demand schedule is a table that shows the relationship between the price of a good and the quantity demanded. Demand curve is a graph of the relationship between the price of a good and the quantity demanded. Example 1a, Sofia's demand for muffins. Sophia's demand for muffins. Notice that Sophia's preference obeyed the law of demand, and that is the inverse relationship between the price of muffins and the quantity of muffins demanded. As the price increased from 0, 1, 2, 3, quantity of muffins demanded decreased from 16 to 14 to 12, and so on. The demand curve is when that schedule is plotted on two-dimensional demand. That is the first point on the intercept, and that is the second point. And when all the points are plotted, the line is joined, and that is called the demand curve. That is the demand curve. A decrease in price from $4 to $2 means an increase in quantity of muffins demanded. Market demand. A market demand is the sum of all individual demands for a good or service. A market demand curve is to sum the individual demand curves horizontally. To find the total quantity demanded at any price, we add the individual quantities. Example 1c, market versus individual demand. Suppose Sofia and Diego are the only two buyers in the market for muffins. QD is the same as quantity demanded. So if we have the price and demand for Sofia's demand and Diego's demand, and the market demand is arrived at by adding 16 by 8. When the price is 0 is 24. When the price is 1 is 21. And you will see is a horizontal summation of Sofia's demand and Diego's demand, and there is the market demand. And so when you plot that schedule, you find a market demand for muffins. When the price increases, in this case from $2 to $4, there is a decrease in quantity of muffins demanded from 20 to 10. And that shows the inverse relationship, the negative relationship between the price and the quantity. A movement along a demand curve. Demand curve shifters 1. The demand curve shows how price affects quantity demanded, other things equal. These other things are non-price determinants of demand, things that determine buyers' demand for the good other than the good's price. Changes in them shifts the demand curve. Shifts in the demand curve are caused by changes in number of buyers, income, price of related goods, tastes, expectations. Increase in the number of buyers increases the quantity demanded at each price and shifts the demand curve to the right. Decrease in the number of buyers decreases the quantity demanded at each price and shifts the demand curve to the left. Example 1e, demand curve shifters. Suppose the number of buyers increase, then at each price, quantity demanded will increase by 5 in this example. And that will be a rightward shift of the demand curve. The demand curve, a whole new demand curve emerges, and that is an increase in demand. Changes in income. Normal good, other things equal, an increase in income leads to an increase in demand for normal goods, and that shifts the demand curve to the right. Inferior good, other things constant, an increase in income leads to a decrease in demand for inferior goods, and that shifts the demand curve to the left. Changes in price of related goods. Two goods are substitutes if an increase in the price of one leads to an increase in the demand for the other. Example, pizza and hamburgers. An increase in the price of pizza increases demand for hamburgers, shifting hamburger demand curve to the right. Other examples include Coke and Pepsi, laptops and tablets, movie streaming and movie theater. Two goods are complements if an increase in the price of one leads to a decrease in the demand for the other. Example, smartphones and apps. If a price of smartphones rise, people buy fewer smartphones and therefore fewer apps. App demand curve shifts to the left. Other examples, college tuition and textbooks, bagels and cream cheese, milk and cookies. Changes in tastes. Tastes, anything that causes a shift in tastes towards a good will increase demand for that good and shifts its demand curve to the right. Example, Advertising convinces consumers that drinking 3 glasses of orange juice a day will help lower cholesterol. Demand for orange juice increases. Expectations about the future. People expect an increase in income, the current demand increases. People expect higher prices, the current demand increases. Example, if people expect their income to rise because they got a promotion at work, their demand for meals at expensive restaurants may increase now. Shift versus movement along curve. Change in demand. A shift in the demand curve. Change in demand occurs when a non-price determinant of demand changes, like income or number of buyers. Change in quantity demanded is a movement along a fixed demand curve, and this occurs when the price changes. Summary: variables that influence buyers. Price of the good itself represents a movement along the demand curve. Income shifts the demand curve. Price of related goods shifts the demand curve. Tastes shifts the demand curve. Expectations shifts the demand curve. Number of buyers shifts the demand curve. Active Learning 1, the demand curve. Draw the demand curve for orange juice D1 and a point A, P1, Q1 on the demand curve. What happens in each of the following scenarios and why? Number A, the price of apple juice increases. Number B, the price of orange juice falls. Number C, consumers' incomes falls and orange juice is a normal good. That's P1 for price and Q1 for Q, and point is A on the demand curve. Number 8, the price of apple juice increases. Orange juice and apple juice are substitutes. A higher price of apple juice prompts consumers to buy more orange juice at P1. The demand for orange juice increases, shifts the demand to the right. B, the price of orange juice falls. That is a move along the demand curve at a point with lower price, higher quantity, moving from A to B. And the demand curve does not shift. C, consumers' incomes falls. Orange juice is a normal good. A lower income prompts consumers to buy less orange juice at P1. The demand for orange juice decreases, which is a left shift of the demand curve from point number A to the left. Supply. Quantity supplied is amount of a good that sellers are willing and able to sell. The law of supply, other things equal, when the price of a good rises, the quantity supplied of the good rises. When the price falls, the quantity supplied falls. Supply schedule and supply curve. Supply schedule is a table that shows the relationship between the price of a good and the quantity supplied. Supply curve is a graph of the relationship between the price of a good and the quantity supplied. Example 2a, Starbucks supply of muffins. Notice that Starbucks supply schedule obeys the law of supply. And what is the law of supply? The direct relationship between the price of muffins and the quantity of muffins supplied. The price increases from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3. Quantity of muffins supplied increases from 0 to 3 to 6 to 12. The law of supply. When you plot this table on a two-dimensional graph, you can plot these points, and when you join the points, there is the supply curve. There's a supply schedule and the supply curve. Market supply versus individual supply. Market supply is the sum of the supplies of all sellers of a good or a service. Market supply curve is the sum of individual supply curves horizontally. To find the total quantity supplied at any price, we add the individual quantities supplied. Example 2, market versus individual supply. Suppose Starbucks and Peet's Coffee are the only two sellers in this market. QS is the same as quantity supplied. That's the price, and that is quantity supplied by Starbucks, and that is quantity supplied by Peet's. To arrive at the market supply, we add at price of 0, you add 0 plus 0. At price of 1, you add 3 plus 2. At price of 2, you add 6 plus 4. And there is the market supply that emerges. And you can plot that schedule and you come up with the market supply curve. An increase in the price from 3 to 10 leads to an increase in quantity of muffins supplied. That is the essence of the law of supply, and it is a movement along the supply curve. Supply curve shifters. The supply curve shows how price affects quantity supplied, other things being equal. These other things are non-price determinants of supply. Changes in them shifts the supply curve. Shifts in supply curve are caused by changes in input prices, technology, number of sellers, expectations about the future. Examples of input prices are wages, price of raw materials. A fall in input price makes production more profitable at each output price. Farms supply a larger quantity at each price. The supply curve shifts to the right. Supply is negatively related to price of inputs. Example 2e, changes in input price. Suppose the price of oranges fall. At each price, the quantity of orange juice will increase by 5 in this example, and we will see a right shift of the supply curve. The supply curve shifts to the right. Changes in technology. Technology determines how much inputs are required to produce a unit of output. A cost-saving technological improvement has the same effect as a fall in input prices and shifts the supply curve to the right. Changes in number of sellers. An increase in the number of sellers increases the quantity supplied at each price and shifts the supply curve to the right. A decrease in the number of sellers decreases the quantity supplied at each price and shifts the supply curve to the left. Expectations about the future. Example, events in the Middle East lead to expectations of higher oil prices. Owners of Texas oil fields reduce supply now, save some inventory to sell later at higher price. The supply curve shifts to the left. Sellers may adjust supply when their expectation of future prices change, if good, not perishable. Shift versus movement along the supply. Change in supply is a shift in the supply curve. It occurs when a non-price determinant of supply changes, like technology or costs. A change in the quantity supplied is a movement along a fixed supply curve and occurs when the price changes. Summary: variables that influence sellers. Price of the good itself represents a movement along the supply curve. Input prices shifts the supply curve. Technology shifts the supply curve. Expectations shifts the supply curve. Number of sellers shifts the supply curve. Active learning 2, the supply curve. Draw a supply curve for apple juice S1 and point A on P1, Q1 on the supply curve. What happens to it in each of the following scenarios and why? Grocery stores cut the price of apple juice. Number A. Number B. A technological advance allows apple juice to be produced at lower cost. Number C. Grocery stores cut the price of orange juice. Here's the graph. P1, Q1, point number A on S1. A decrease in the price of apple juice is a movement along the supply curve to a lower price and lower quantity. So the new point is at B. Supply curve does not shift and it is a movement along a given supply curve. Number B, technological advance. A better technology reduces production costs. At each price, quantity supplied increases. The supply curve shifts to the right. Number C, a decrease in price of orange juice. This is a trick question. Apple juice and orange juice are substitutes, a demand shifter, not supply curve shifter. This shifts the demand curve for apple juice, not supply curve. Supply and demand together. Equilibrium. Equilibrium, a price has reached the level where quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. In this example, $3 is equilibrium price, 15 is equilibrium quantity. At equilibrium price, where quantity supplied is equal to quantity demanded, equilibrium has been established. And that is $3, and equilibrium quantity is 15. Ask the experts. Price gouging. Connecticut should pass its Senate Bill 60, which states that during a severe weather event emergency, no person within the chain of distribution of consumer goods and services shall sell or offer to sell consumer goods or services for a price that is unconscionably excessive. And economists disagrees 77%, and 7% agree, and 16% uncertain. Okay, leave the market alone. Markets not in equilibrium. Surplus is an excess supply, that is, quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded. And when that happens, if the price is $5, then the quantity demanded is 9 and the quantity supplied is 25, resulting in a surplus of 16, that is 25 minus 9. Facing a surplus, sellers try to increase sales by cutting prices. This causes quantity demanded to rise and quantity supplied to fall, which reduces surplus, and so on until market reaches equilibrium. A surplus has a downward pressure on price, and price gravitates towards equilibrium. A shortage, on the other hand, that is excess demand. Quantity demanded is greater than quantity supplied. If the price is set at $1, then quantity demanded is 21 muffins. Quantity supplied is 5 muffins. Resulting in a shortage of 16 muffins, that is 20 minus 21 minus 5. Facing a shortage, sellers raise the price from $1 to $2, causing quantity demanded to fall and quantity supplied to rise, which reduces the shortage, and so on until market reaches equilibrium. When the price is below equilibrium, the shortage will arise and there will be an upward pressure on price, and therefore price gravitates towards equilibrium again. Supply and demand together. 3 steps to analyzing changes in equilibrium. 1. Decide whether the event shifts the supply curve, the demand curve, or in some cases both curves. Number 2. Decide whether the curves shift to the right or to the left. Number 3. Use the supply and demand diagram. Compare the initial and the new equilibrium and effects on equilibrium price and quantity. Example 3, market for muffins. Price on the vertical axis, quantity on the horizontal axis. There's D1 is the demand for muffins, S1 is the supply of muffins, and market equilibrium is where the two curves cross each other at P1 and Q1. Event number A, increase in the price of donuts. Increase in the price of donuts. Step number 1, demand curve shifts. Muffins and donuts are substitutes. Step 2, demand shifts to the right. Consumers will buy fewer expensive donuts and switch to muffins. Step 3, increase in price and quantity of muffins. Event B, new technology of producing muffins. Step 1, supply curve shifts because new technology reduces production costs. Step 2, supply shifts right because lower production costs makes production more profitable at any given price. Step 3, decrease in price and increase in quantity. Event price of donuts rises and new technology reduces production costs. Step 1, both curves shift. Step 2, both shifts to the right. Step 3, quantity rises, but the effect on price is ambiguous. If demand increases more than supply, price rises. Events, this is 3C, a shift in both supply and demand. Price of donuts rise and new technology reduces production costs. And here in step 3, quantity rises, but the effect on price is ambiguous. If supply increases more than demand, price falls. How prices allocate resources. Markets are usually a good way to organize economic activity. In market economies, prices adjust to balance supply and demand. These equilibrium prices are the signals that guide economic decisions and thereby allocate scarce resources. Active learning 3, shifts in supply and demand. Use the 3-step method to analyze the effects of each event on the equilibrium price and quantity of orange juice. Event A fall in the price of apple juice. Event B, the price of oranges decline because of an abundant orange crop. Event C, events A and B both occur simultaneously. Active learning a fall in the price of apple juice. The market for orange juice is what we see here. Steps. Number 1, demand curve shifts. Number 2, demand curve shifts left. Number 3, price and quantity both fall. What about 3B, a fall in the price of oranges? The steps. Supply curve shifts to the right, and price falls and quantity falls. Event 3C, events A and B together. Number 1, both curves shift. See part A and B. Number 2, D shifts left, S shifts right, and 3, price falls. Effect on quantity is ambiguous. The fall in demand reduces quantity. The increase in supply increases quantity. Think, pair, and share. You are watching a national news broadcast. It is reported that a typhoon is heading for the Washington coast and that it will likely destroy much of this year's apple. Your roommate says, "This is not going to affect me. I don't eat apples. I only drink pineapple smoothies." As an eager economic student, what is your response going to be? Explain. What other markets will be impacted by the destroyed apple crop and how? Chapter in a nutshell summary. Economists use the model of supply and demand to analyze competitive markets. Many buyers and sellers are price takers. The demand curve shows how the quantity of a good demanded depends on the price. The law of demand: as the price of a good falls, the quantity demanded rises. The demand curve slopes downwards. Other determinants of demand include income, price of substitutes and complements, tastes, expectations, and number of buyers. If one of these factors change, demand curve shifts. The supply curve shows how the quantity of a good supplied depends on the price. Law of supply: as the price of a good rises, the quantity supplied rises. The supply curve slopes upward. Other determinants of supply: input prices, technology, expectations, and number of sellers. If one of these factors changes, supply curve shifts. The intersection of the supply and demand curves determines the market equilibrium. At the equilibrium price, quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. The behavior of buyers and sellers naturally drives markets towards their equilibrium. When the market price is above the equilibrium price, there is a surplus of the good, which causes the market price to fall. When the market price is below the equilibrium price, there is a shortage, which causes the market price to rise. To analyze how any event influences a market, we use the supply and demand diagram to examine how the event affects the equilibrium price and quantity. Number one, decide whether the event shifts the supply curve or the demand curve or both. Number two, decide in which direction the curve shifts. Number three, compare the new equilibrium with the initial one. In market economies, prices are the signals that guide economic decisions and thereby allocate scarce resources.